Winnipeg appears to be playing a patient game when it comes to free agency. When will Chevy know the moment is right? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. And, of course, especially now as we're in the quieter, months of the offseason, although recently, with free agency opening this week, been a little more active, you could say. And for the Jets, though, that hasn't really been quite the case. Winnipeg is definitely making signings, and they're active in the free agent market, but there's not a lot that I would say Winnipeg is going for when it comes to their like actual NHL roster, right? We've mostly seen more on the depth side of things, and I would say for the bulk of Winnipeg signings, other than like DeMello, we're generally looking at like Manitoba Moose signings. I think that's been the general gist that I've got, which is fine. I think if you want to bulk the Moose up, that's certainly good, creating a good environment for the AHL fans, and also a couple of prospects who will be filtering in, like Colby Barlow, who's really starting to get into pro level reps, and a few others. Danny Zilkin, of course, is still there. So there's real incentive to give that group a nice supportive environment. You do wonder at some point, though, are the Jets going to push for a little bit more? That said, this is one of those things where the Jets are playing the long game a bit, I guess. They're being patient, and we've seen some interesting stuff from Darren Dreger. Apparently, the Jets tried to extend Sean Monahan, didn't work. They tried for Adam Henrique, that didn't work. They tried for Blake Lizotte, that also did not work. And so Winnipeg ended up not tying up lots of money in some bad contracts. We'll talk about what benefit that probably gives Winnipeg and whether or not hearing that the Jets dodged bullets makes me happy in just a moment. But before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Now, like I said, with the news that the Jets have kind of been active but missed on a lot of their targets, I guess my concern is that missing on targets means you still intended to sign them. And with Monahan looking for 5 years, Henrique looking for a couple of years, and Lizotte, I don't know what he was looking for. I don't know what Winnipeg's offer was, but probably another multi-year deal. I would suspect that, for all intents and purposes, the Jets probably made relatively competitive offers against the teams that these guys ended up going to. And for me, I just, when it comes to free agency, I always worry where the Jets are going to be prioritizing their cap allocations to. And I think this is one of those really good examples where the Jets kind of got bailed out. Not to belabor the point, but I feel like getting bailed out by your, competing teams doesn't really make me feel great about the direction, in part because, let's be honest, right? You don't want to have somebody else do the work for you. You want to have a winning formula, and I think that is something that the Jets are still trying to perhaps figure out, I guess. But in the meantime, Winnipeg did make a couple of extra moves for the Moose. Mason Shaw, Hayden Fleury, they're joining Jarrett Anderson-Dolan yesterday for Winnipeg's Moose signings. And I think that's probably good. I think, the Moose being a little bit deeper, a little bit stronger, that kind of stuff makes me relatively happy. Like I said, there's no harm in having a deeper minor league squad that's doing a little bit more and hopefully giving the fans something to be excited about. It'd also be nice if you could create a supportive environment for some of your mid-tier prospects. Obviously, Barlow, I think, is probably in the upper tier of Winnipeg's pool, but, considering we have Lambert and Chibrikov and a few others, he's definitely more like the 4 to 5 seed, but he's still a good kid. And I think it'd be nice if, the Jets are able to give a solid AHL squad that also, gives the kids a taste of success and, prepares him for what the Jets are going to be like. So, I'm going to be tracking the Moose probably a little closer this year just because I want to see how some of our prospects are handling. Barlow in particular is somebody who I'm curious in because he's got a big shot, but I've always sort of felt that based on the limited bits I've seen of him, there might be some limitations to his game. I don't want to say that that's going to be a guaranteed thing, but it's just something I've noticed, and I wonder if that's going to continue to be a problem or if moving to the pro level will start to push his game in a more positive, more diverse direction. That's not to say that he's like a simple player by any stretch of the imagination. I just sort of wonder, that extra layer of dynamism that can separate a decent prospect from a truly great one. Will he have that one? And I'm curious. I kind of want to see. I will certainly give him plenty of time to develop. He's still very young, although he doesn't look like it. You wouldn't know it looking at him, but he is still a very young player. And so it's important to just give him time to really grow, mature, and hopefully with the Moose thrive. If he has a very strong Moose season, you do wonder towards the back half of this Jets year if he does get some NHL time. He's definitely more physically developed than a lot of the other players the Jets have. And, considering his age, could be interesting if he hits the ground running with Manitoba to start the year. So lots of stuff to consider, but I think the primary thing that I get the sense from Winnipeg is that they're waiting for something. I think that there's a sense that there's going to be stuff that falls through the cracks, and the Jets are sort of hoping to pounce on that. Now, I will admit the number of opportunities to make that happen is shrinking, and for better or for worse, there's not as much available for Winnipeg's actual signing options that I would say is worth it. Nate Schmidt, signing for like $800K, I think is a good example of a deal that if it was like a different player, obviously not Schmidt because we just bought him out, but those are the kinds of contracts that you could potentially round out the bottom of your, I guess, signing field with, and it would have been decent value for the Jets. Again, not the same player, but a contract in that vein. Obviously, Winnipeg is generally patient so far, and there's still a couple of big names that I'm curious about. Shillington being one of them, maybe Sprong is an option, but I feel like Winnipeg is just being patient and waiting for everyone to sort of finish up their big expenditures, getting the big offers out of the way. There's going to be some players who are looking for work, and Winnipeg might be one of those teams that can actually offer it. I know that there's some thought about Kevin LeBlanc. He had a really rough past couple of seasons with the Sharks, and I don't know what his game is like, but we'll kind of explore some of the remaining free agents. I know we sort of talked about it yesterday, but I think there's a question of, is there anything left really worth getting excited about, and how long is waiting, really worth it, right? Is there going to be a moment where the Jets basically pass any sort of real attainable value off of the free agent market? Because let's be real, right? The longer the Jets wait, the less likely it is they're actually going to be able to find like a true blue NHLer that's worth actually bringing on. So some food for thought there. But again, there is intrigue, and I think that there's some potential depth adds that could be of interest, maybe one or two big swings, but we'll just have to wait and see what the Jets are planning. We'll talk about how much longer the Jets can afford to wait on this in just a little bit. But before we go too much further, did want to talk about our friends and partners at Gametime. When it comes to buying tickets, we all know that it can be a painful process. You get hit with surprise fees. Sometimes you buy tickets blindly, not really sure where you're sitting, and you don't always get a sense of the view that you have. Gametime totally they totally know that same pain. They've been through the same process we have, and they wanted to create a service that finally gives you peace of mind. They offer killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat in the venue, and their lowest price guarantee, all backed by an event cancellation protection as well. They are so good and so trusted that they've become an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And for those of you who are Jays or Orioles fans, I am on the Orioles side, but maybe you're a Jays fan, this is a great way to get in on the game. For those of you out there who are heading over to Ontario anytime soon, maybe you should give Gametime a shot. Like I said, they offer flash deals, zone deals and prices, and they always come back with their lowest price guarantee. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, download Gametime. Create an account and be sure to use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on today's episode as we're just chatting about Winnipeg. And obviously, Winnipeg's been a little bit quiet with the free agency market, and I think that there's a sense that the Jets are waiting for something to happen, maybe a deal to break their way. We'll talk about how much longer they can afford to wait in just a quick moment. But before we move on, just wanted to let you know, for all of you Fox Sports or ESPN watchers, if you find yourselves having to turn down the volume, maybe you should make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now coming back to the Jets, obviously, a sense of timing and patience is usually a hallmark of the Chevy regime. Sometimes they've sat on their hands to the point where they actually missed opportunities. I don't know that we're necessarily there yet. For the most part, I would say, barring trades that have kind of come through, I would suspect that Winnipeg really hasn't missed on anyone. In fact, I would actually argue them not signing a lot of the players that have become available is probably better than spending lots of money recklessly. But, at some point you're going to have to start making moves, and I think that's where the Jets may want to take a bit of a more aggressive approach pretty soon. Not that there's a lot of guys that I would say I'm really thrilled with. I wouldn't, go out of my way to make a bunch of huge splashes. There are some players, though, that are potentially intriguing. One guy that I'm sort of curious about that's kind of been out there, and I haven't really talked about him a lot because, quite honestly, he's been a little disappointing, but it's Kailer Yamamoto. Yamamoto has sort of bounced around the league a bit. He had one pretty good season with the Oilers, and then the rest of his career has generally been fairly modest. And I sort of wonder what Yamamoto has left in the tank. He does play center. I don't know that he would actually be a particular upgrade for the Jets, but if you're looking for a punt that's kind of in the Philip Zadina territory of potentially being an interesting reclamation project, maybe it's worth a shot. He didn't exactly light the lamp a ton for Seattle, so I'm not sitting here thinking he's going to be a huge addition, but given that Yamamoto is going to be looking for a job and might be a little bit on the outs here in terms of teams that are actually willing to sign him, maybe the Jets can bring him in and see if he has something left to offer. I think guys like these are nice for giving yourself a little bit more roster depth, especially because the Jets are going to have to deal with injuries at some point. It's going to happen, and Winnipeg's going to need at least a few experienced NHLers to help supplement when some of the kids are either injured or perhaps struggling under the weight of increased responsibilities with their respective squad. Now, in terms of how long the Jets probably want to sit on some of these other deals, whether it's like Sprong or another player, they maybe have another few days before I think you start to worry that, the time has passed for them to make a big signing. Obviously, signings can occur throughout the entire offseason, but I think for the Jets, it's important not to let guys like Sprong or some of their other potential cheap reclamation players go for too much longer. There are some interesting, depth options. Again, like I said, I'm not really looking at this market and seeing a ton of guys that I'm banging the table to go after. I guess you could potentially look at maybe a Shattenkirk or something, but at this point, I'm not really thrilled seeing most of the options that are available. There's like a James Van Riemsdyk potential for, the Jets to maybe look at if they want to add some cheap veteran scoring depth. He's very good, and look, he may be 36, but he's still got a fair bit left in the tank. But again, he may not be interested in coming to Winnipeg. Really couldn't blame him if that's his assessment. But aside from that, there's just, I don't know. You look around the league and you're looking at some of the available free agents. It's getting to a point where, like, at this point, the Jets maybe are better off not making too many moves. I would say that, my primary focus would be trades. I think that's where the Jets have a real chance to come away with some real success, especially because, there's a lot of RFAs that are perhaps not interested in extending with their respective clubs just yet. I think one of the biggest ones that's out there right now is obviously Marty Necas. Necas, I still think resigns with Carolina at some point. I don't know when that'll happen, but if it does, he would probably be one of the biggest names off the trade market. Although, in my opinion, I don't know if that makes me upset. Necas, if you look at some of his scoring rates and stuff, there's a lot of red flags for giving him a big contract. And if he's asking for like $7 or $8 million, that's a very hard pass. I know that he's skilled. I know that he scores some flashy goals. Would not give anywhere near that kind of cash for what he actually offers on the ice. So, for me, it's tough, right? There's not a ton of options out there that I think are abundantly exciting. I mean, the Jets might have to go for some guys who are already signed to deals. One name that is of interest is Dylan Strome. I feel like the Caps are going to be able to sort of avoid some of the issues that they're going to run up against with the recent signings that they've made. But if they have to move a player that's actually got some term and some cash, well, Strome would be a huge piece that could potentially get you McGroarty plus, and I think for the Jets, it would be a major upgrade to their top six. Now, I just don't really see that happening, with Strome having just signed that extension pretty recently, and a player that, quite honestly, I think the Caps really love, and Oshie likely mulling over retirement. I think that they already have their cap savings sort of baked in. But for me, if you're trying to be aggressive on the market and looking for something that's a lot better than most of the free agents that you could potentially sign, Strome actually moves the needle for Winnipeg, and he wouldn't just be blocking roster spots for the kids. You're legitimately getting a true top-end player, a guy who could really help Winnipeg's goal-scoring efforts and is extremely versatile in ways that Winnipeg just doesn't have a ton of offensive talent with. So, guys like that I think could be of interest. Other than that, though, Winnipeg may just spend most of the offseason playing things pretty quietly. I think that there's a sense that training camp and preseason will be big opportunities and tests to see what the kids are made of. I think the Jets are now going to gamble more on the youth with them having missed most of their free agent signings. The fact that all three of those big targets ended up going elsewhere, thank goodness, I think suggests the Jets may be sort of out of options in terms of major free agent signings, and I don't want them to just chase somebody and give them money because they're desperate looking for roster depth. I think at this point, it's important for the Jets to stay focused, not lose sight of things, don't go away from the process that I think they're starting to undertake, and be cautious about committing lots of money in term to players who just aren't going to be worth it down the road. We've seen lots of teams like Nashville and a few others getting really aggressive on the market. Seattle, another big one. And I'll be honest, while the Preds definitely improved, they've also locked up a fair bit of term and money for aging players, right? So how much longer that's really going to be productive is tough to say. I think for the Kraken, man, I just don't know what their plan is. They just seem to be eternally mediocre, and I'm not sure that's really going to change. So we'll see how that shakes out for them, but all I can say is good luck with that Chandler Stephenson contract, because that feels like one that's going to be a buyout candidate pretty quickly. Other than that, though, Winnipeg's best option, again, like I said, is to play the youth and maybe look at the trade market in a few weeks. There's no real urgency for them to go rushing into things right now. I think, if they really don't sign any free agents, I don't know that I can really complain. Like I said, unless it's Sprong or somebody like that, I'm just not that interested. So If they can get Zadina or Yamamoto or players that are interesting reclamation projects to come in and potentially fight for spots, I'm interested in that. But beyond that, you better have a sure thing if you're committing any sort of money in term, especially with a guy like Sprong, who is a pretty proven commodity for your middle six. But curious to know if there's a free agent out there that's apparently being overlooked. Maybe you have a name on your mind that is, a sure must-sign player for Lord knows what reason. Drop that player in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. While we're at it, just thought I'd chat about a few other moves that have happened around the NHL in the meantime, and maybe some stuff to look forward to as we start getting closer and closer to next week's training camp stuff. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on tonight's episode as we're just finalizing some stuff. There's been some moves here and there that have been of interest, I suppose, especially if you're tracking free agents that the Jets potentially could have been interested in, maybe a trade or two that's a little bit unusual. I guess, biggest signing for today was Vlad Tarasenko to the Red Wings for 2 years at something like 4.75-ish million. Actually, it might be a little bit more than that, more like around 4.75, which, I mean, it's not the worst contract, but I kind of look at that and I think to myself, with the Wings not really in a competitive spot, they just keep making strange signings that I frankly don't understand. Detroit seems to think that they're more competitive now that they've had a very aggressive offseason. And all I can say is I just look at the Wings and I'm like, I don't really think they actually improved all that much. Detroit just seems like a team that's perhaps overestimating where it is in the development process and where it is in the rebuild stages. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. They also traded Robbie Fabry and a conditional fourth rounder from next year's draft in exchange for Gage Alexander from the Ducks. I don't know anything about Alexander. My suspicion is that this is probably more of a cap dump. Fabry, has been an unfortunate case of super talented, super great player, always injured. Like, the guy just has not been able to stay healthy for many years now. And while he does have some really strong stretches of play, his body being made of glass at times has really inhibited his ability to be such a key player for a couple of teams, St. Louis and Detroit among those. But it's just a shame because I feel like there is a very good player there and he's shown some fantastic flashes, and it just never really coalesced into a longer career. So maybe Anaheim's going to be, hoping for a trade deadline flip here, somebody that they can perhaps retain some salary on and get a decent return for should he be able to stay healthy. But my suspicion is, the Wings are probably just looking to get some cap space back from a guy that they feel is probably towards the end of his NHL playing days. So unfortunate there. But, I guess it is what it is. Fabry would have been intriguing for the Jets as like a really cheap option, but with Winnipeg not really having a lot of space to offer a player who's injured a lot, probably a wise choice not to go after him in this case. For the Jets, speaking of which, they did release their training camp roster the other day. Didn't really talk about it because, there's a lot of other stuff to cover in, with respect to free agency and stuff. But if you are interested, we have quite a few invitees, including some big prospects like Kevin He, Barlow, Lucius, Wagner, and Walton and Lopane, some of our new guys. Brad Lambert's also joining, of course. Not really shocked there. He'll be making the Jets for sure. We are also seeing Max Nemesnikov, who's Vlad's brother, which is pretty cool. Some bloodlines there. Other than that, probably not a ton that's going to be like super crazy for most folks. Maybe Jacob Julian would be fun to watch. I would say, this group in particular strikes me as a lot of the sort of middle tier prospects, plus a couple of upper tier guys who are going to be more fighting for Moose spots at present, right? one player that I'm curious about is Connor Levis. Levis has had some limited success at the pro level so far, only had a very short stint. I would like to see him, really grow into a bigger role with the Moose this upcoming season. Believe that's where he'll end up. Levis has a lot of interesting passing skill that I think most teams really could make use of, and especially a team like the Jets, right? Winnipeg's distribution skill has traditionally been a little bit of a struggle bus. I'll be honest, I think that's something that they could really improve upon, and I think if you're the Jets, you would certainly want that to be a point of focus going forward. But for the forwards, I would say that this is a pretty solid, like, mixed group of likely depth players if they pan out as NHLers, plus a couple of top-end talents that will, I'm sure, dazzle the crowd. On the D side, I'm curious to know what we see with, Dylan Anhorn, Alphonse Frey, Salamonson, Kuzman, and Brown. Those guys all have some decent upside. Anhorn, if you remember, was brought on last year out of college, only played a couple of Moose games. Maybe we'll see him start to get a bigger role. He's like 25, so at this point, if he's going to make any sort of impact at a higher level, it's going to have to be a big preseason and camp out of him. I do think that he's a very fun player, and he's certainly scored quite a bit in college. We'll see if that starts to translate at a pro level. If he does have a really big year for Manitoba, he might be an interesting player to eventually earn a third pairing spot. I don't know that he's necessarily a top-end prospect that we're talking about here, but for a college free agent that you picked up for nothing, Anhorn was one of the more touted free agents coming out of college last year, and so it'll be interesting to see what a full year of Moose looks like for him. He is a lefty, which we don't necessarily need more of, but, curious to know if he can play on the right side, if that becomes a thing. So again, just a free prospect that you can, stack the Moose with. Any help that they can get is probably really beneficial, especially on the puck moving side. Other than that, we have Thomas Milic, Alex Worthington, and Dominic DiVincentis in net. So, Milic and DiVincentis are both going to be competing at some point for maybe some AHL time. The AHL depth chart is probably going to look like Comrie and Milic this upcoming season. DiVincentis, I'm not really sure what the plan is with him long-term. I suspect this year probably not going to be his Moose debut, but maybe a little bit later we'll start to see him get to the pros. He's still pretty young, and I don't think the Jets are in any real rush to kind of force him out of Brampton, but he is 20, and he's getting closer and closer to perhaps being a pro age. His Brampton his North Bay season this past year did take a bit of a step back comparatively speaking. His numbers all definitely plunged below, the previous 2022 season, when I think he was like OHL goaltender of the year. So something to keep an eye on. Obviously goalies are voodoo, so don't read too much into, junior numbers necessarily, but curious to know if that's a reflection of his own performance or if North Bay was just a little bit more leaky. You look at his actual record in net, and it was still pretty strong overall. So the numbers taking a bit of a step back this past season, maybe not the happiest moment, but we'll see what happens with him long term. Like I said, goalies are just one of those things where I tend not to look too closely at the numbers until they start playing upper level competition, right? So give him some time, let him marinate. Milic looks like he's probably ready to take on a bigger AHL role this year. Comrie is certainly capable of being the starter for the Moose. So in terms of goalie depth, let's just say the Jets are probably looking pretty good. But let me know what you're hoping for out of this upcoming prospects camp. Are you excited to see some of the kids? Who are you looking forward to seeing? What are you hoping the Jets, accomplish with some of these camp invitees? Drop your thoughts below at my social medias or at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Of course, the first couple of sessions will kick off at the end of this week, and then over the weekend we'll have some stuff, and should be a good time for training camp. So get excited. We'll see how that goes. But for tonight's episode, that's going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here on Thursday for even more Jets off-season coverage.